Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, your podcast where narrative meets design. Today, we're once again joined by Scott Rogers, a prolific game designer, author, and educator whose fingerprints are on some of the most iconic franchises in both digital and analog games. Scott's career has seen him working for companies such as Disney, Capcom, and Sony. And he's the author of a series of books on game design, including Swipe This, Level Up, and Your Turn. These days, he's focusing more on board games, but he's never stopped teaching, mentoring, and sharing what he's learned with the next generation of designers. Today, we're talking prototyping, not just as a step in game development, but as a creative mindset that spans the disciplines, mediums, and even parts of our personal lives. So, let's get into it. Scott, welcome back to the show.
It is my pleasure, Gerald.
I think it's both our pleasures, but probably more mine than yours, but I appreciate it. Today, I want to talk to you because I've been watching you for a very long time now, a couple of years probably, what you do with board games and prototyping and building out these amazing, fabulous, bespoke board games. So I want to talk to you about prototyping, and you've gone on the record a couple of times talking to other people or talking online about prototyping. So you are the brain to pick on this subject, and that is the subject I want to talk about. So, but before we dig into it, usually I get your origin story. You've been here before, so we can go back and check that out. But for anybody first time listening to you, or let's catching up from your last visit, what have you been working on lately? What's got your attention these days? What's happening that's fun and exciting that you can talk about?
Right. Well, for those of you that aren't familiar with who I am, I have a brief summary, and that is over 30 years as a game designer. I've worked in AAA video games. I've created board games. I've worked for Disney Imagineering, making games for the park in Anaheim. I've written many books on the subject of game design, two of which I see on your shelf back there.
Oh,
is the third one there too? Okay. And I teach occasionally at USC, among other places, game design. I am all games all the time. As for what I have been doing or what has caught my attention, I guess, lately, that's a really good question. I'm always playing things. So I have a very robust group of friends that like to play the new hotness. One of them just returned from Essen with a bunch of games, so we were checking out a few from that. My coworkers also are gamers, which is lovely, and I have a regular gaming group that I play games with. So for the Halloween season, we played Betrayal House on the Hill a few times, which is one of my favorites. We played Camp Grizzly. Trying to think of what other spooky ones we played. I didn't get to dive as deep into the spooky games as I wanted to, but that's okay. The Halloween can be all year round as far as I'm concerned.
Amen. Agreed. Oh, excuse me. Agreed. 100%. And I see the Haunted Mansion stuff there. So obviously you're as much of a fan of the spooky stuff as I am. So I love it.
I call it my house. And I have good claim to it as well.
You indeed. I've been to your house many, many, many times. So, well, okay, let's dig into the topic of the day, and let's start a little wide here. When people hear the word prototype, they often think of, quick, dirty, just mechanic tests or narrative tests, or just building enough that you can play with it. But you've used prototyping in everything from AAA video games to bespoke board games, as I was mentioning. So, in your point of view, what is a big picture definition of prototyping? What's prototyping really, in your opinion?
Prototyping is creating. Let's focus more on analog gaming than video gaming for a second, because there are a lot of similarities, but there are some very essential differences as well. And I firmly believe that any game can be prototyped on paper, even a complex video game, and that's part of what I teach when I teach about the game design. So prototype is something that allows you to get your ideas in front of other people as fast as possible or necessary. Iteration is the heart of game design. And so if you don't you have to play a game in order to understand it and in order to improve it and in order to create it. It's an essential part of the process. And the prototype is the mechanism in which it starts as, it can be as simple as a sketch in the sense of one system or one mechanic that you're testing out, and then you add in other mechanics and narrative and other things like that on top of it. Or it can be a moderately elaborate production, and I think that there's good reasons to do both.
That's an excellent way to define it. You've said before that you need to prototype early and you need to prototype often, and I think you're kind of getting around to that topic there. But I guess, what are the biggest creative production advantages to that approach? What's the reason to prototype early, prototype often?
All right. So prototyping early, there's a few benefits for that. The first is a lot of people get hung up in their own head about their game, what it is, what it isn't, how good it is. Every prototype is a beautiful baby until it's put in front of other people, and then they tell you how ugly your baby is and what's wrong with it and all that, which is fine. You just have to be able to take that criticism. That's also a very important skill for game designers. You got to build up a bit of a thick skin and not take everything so personally. That said, you want to be able to get something out that people can play, that they can comment on. Now, when it comes to playtesting, I feel that there's kind of an order to how it should be done. The first is, when I am building a prototype, I put essentially the components, I kind of put them on the table and look at them and think about the relationships that I want them to have with each other. And a lot of ergonomics as well, like how many cards do I want somebody to draw? What seems to be the right amount of cards? What, rolling dice, how many dice do we need to do what needs to be done? If there's a board, rough out the outline of how things interact with it, whether it's dice or cards or miniatures or something else. I call that the "is it a thing" stage. And so once I've determined that the components are doing something that will eventually lead to something that is fun, although I'm not a big fan of the word fun. I feel it's maybe the worst metric to use. I prefer the term interactive. And so I look to see if the interactions are interesting and doing what I want them to do. Then I start turning them into a game, which means I start making up rules, because rules are what makes a game. If you don't have a rule set, then you don't have a game. So I start to play the game with the rules that I'm coming up with. And a lot of times that's just kind of held in my head, although I really urge people to try to write them down as soon as possible. And matter of fact, an interesting exercise is to write the rules for a game first and then build it. And I've done that once or twice, and it's really interesting. It works pretty well in my experience. But granted, you also have a good understanding of what rules are and what they do and all that. Anyway, once you have the rules codified and you play your game a few times by yourself to see if things kind of hold up, which they can, but they can also have a lot of flailing edge case bits. And those things are going to get found very quickly in this next step. And the next step is to take it to people who know games. And I don't mean gamers. I mean game designers. So if you are a game designer, hopefully you have a community, whether it's online or in person. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of game designers that live in Los Angeles, where I live. And so I lean on them pretty heavily at this stage in the game. And what I love about game designers is they understand the language of games. And if I say, I want this game to do this, they'll go, okay. And then they'll start looking at it through that lens and be able to cut through the quick of what is right and wrong about what's going on in the game. So I always go to game designers first.
It's possible to build that kind of community or find that kind of community if you don't live in a larger center that has those.
You'll have to do it more online. Online has become a huge boon for people that are living out in the proverbial middle of nowhere. Although I would argue that if you do a little poking around, you might be surprised at who lives where, right? Gaming is it's an industry, while there are centers to it. So, for example, in tabletop gaming, Los Angeles is a great location. Seattle is one of the strongest. Minneapolis is a huge area for game design. New York, a few other places as well. Often, if you find events like Unpub or Protospiel or things like that, you'll often find a community of game designers as well. So if you live near any of those types of events, then that's a good indication that you might be able to find some people to regularly play test with, whether it's virtually or in real life.
Nice. You mentioned getting things on the table, playing with the pieces and having a look at them. And that threw my brain back. We're going to go off a sidetrack for a second here too. One of the board games you worked on the last few years had these little dinosaurs that you wound up. Where did that come from? What made you want to try that?
I'd always wanted to make a game with a wind-up critter. Now, there's disadvantages to it. The ones that are commercially made are not, they're actually pretty predictable. I was kind of hoping they'd be more unpredictable in their action, but the ones that I ended up using tended to pull to the left. So I had to design the game around that limitation because I tested 50 or so different, because I've been doing for the past year or so, year and a half, I do what I've now come to refer to as me starters, which essentially it's a Kickstarter, but I do it without the platform. So that way it saves me some money. It saves me some effort, because making a Kickstarter in 2025 is very different than when it started in 2015. And it's a lot of work. And I just wasn't feeling like I wanted to do all that work. And I also I don't have the storage capabilities for a huge number of games. So I wanted to make something small and actually kind of bespoke. So I did one that was only 10 units. The second one, the one you're talking about, is called Oh No, There Goes Tokyo, and that was 30 units. And my current one, which I'm in kind of hopefully over the hump of production, called Oh, I Do My Own Stunts, that is 100 units. So they're not big at all, right? When I tell people I'm publishing my own game and I tell them how many I'm making, they kind of scoff at me, because it's, an average, somebody who's in it to do it is usually, we're talking factors of thousands, 1,000 being a small print run, 3 to 5,000 kind of being an average, 10 is kind of a big one. And then if you're a big success, then you're starting to crest into the hundreds. But for me, it works fine. I'm doing it because I want to learn the experience of production. I'm not necessarily interested in being a publisher per se, but I feel like it will make me a better production partner, having that knowledge. And to be honest, I think that knowledge, I recently took a job with a big game publisher, and I think that knowledge was part of the reason why they hired me, is because they saw that I was reaching further than what maybe a lot of other designers do, or it's just anybody can do this. It's just, do they have the stomach for it? And I just kind of happen to like it. It's not, I don't love it, but I like it, so it's not a chore. There's bumps, but that's anything.
Yeah, true that. Well, you've also spoken in the past about using polished prototypes for pitching. Oh, that was fun. Well, let's talk about that, because that's something of interest to a lot of people who listen to this podcast is pitching and getting that idea out there. So, I guess talk me through that. What makes a prototype not just a functional way to test a mechanic and something you can use to pitch?
Yeah. So remember when I said that there are several steps to play testing. So the next step after you play it with your designer friends, because designers can look at the ugly index cards and your chicken scratch writing and kind of decipher it, right? The next step, though, are gamers. So now you get people that are familiar with playing games. So they've played other games. They have things to compare them to. It's kind of like movie fans, right? Where you go to see a new movie and they go, oh, that movie was kind of like, it was like Die Hard, or it was like Star Wars, or it was like whatever. So they now have a library, as it were, of experiences that they can compare things to. And they also they've developed taste. They know what they like and they don't like. And so if you're going to have to start targeting your audience for this. And now I have some friends that are within that gamer group, although some of them are game designers as well. And they kind of live to break a game, which is a blessing and a curse, because it's a curse because nobody likes having their game broken. But when they reveal that, you're like, all right, crap, I got to go fix that. Right. And it happens. It's, I say that doing game prototypes is like forging a sword. You have to heat it up and bang on it and then cool it down, and then heat it up and bang on it and cool it down until it becomes something you can use and it cuts the way you want it to. So with this process, in this process, I have to start to make the game do the things that I want it to do. And I've come to realize that even though I don't always start this way, I'm a thematic designer. I like theme. I like story. It's the things, two of the things that I find very appealing about tabletop gaming. And so when I am creating games that have a narrative or a theme, images and narrative elements go a long way. They do a lot of heavy lifting for the game. So if I say, I have a coin that's single unit and a sack of coins that's more than a single coin, people will get that, right? There's a language that stereotypes and archetypes and tropes carry with them. And those things, even though I think people use those terms pejoratively, I think there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with a stereotype, as long as it's not a harmful or hurtful stereotype. But stereotypes help people understand things. So if I show a car that has red and blue lights on the top, people immediately know that they're a police car, but they also know that there's probably policemen in it, and they're probably in the pursuit of criminals, or if it's a different, more cynical type of game, that there may be characters that could be bad as well. It just depends on what your mental model of this archetype is. So we can use this to our advantage. So I like to make game prototypes that have visual representations, partially because I also like to draw and create and do Photoshop. And I'm not bad at it. I'm actually, I will pat myself on the back and say I'm pretty good at it. And people have often told me that my prototypes are very pretty. And some fellow game designers have told me they're unnecessarily pretty. But I do it partially just because I derive pleasure from making them pretty. So they can't take that away from me. I'm just gonna make it pretty.
Nice. So apart from getting it to the point where you can pitch it and you can get gamers playing it and they can respond to that, are there any other extra benefits to taking a prototype to a polished state, or are there things you can learn along the way or ways you can improve?
So the pros are, I will give you an experience. I don't know if I talked about this before. My very first published game, which was called Ray Guns and Rocket Ships, which was published in 2017, Kickstarter. I brought the prototype to Gen Con because I was told that if I want to sell a game, go to Gen Con, a tabletop game. And I made a prototype, very pretty prototype. And I had a friend of mine who is a professional concept artist do the cover for me, paid him a few $100, and he painted a gorgeous picture. I did a lot of photoshopping of cards. I had another friend sculpt me miniatures, printed them out. So I had essentially what looked like, to the untrained eye, a completed game. Now, the irony or humor, I guess, is that, it wasn't. Everything had to kind of be redone other than the cover, because they were either Google images or they were 3D printed, but they were using I forget what it's called, but the wire that has kind of that rough sandpaper texture to it, which is very unpleasant. Resin printing it wasn't quite a thing at that point, or at least on a commercial scale. It already existed on an industrial scale. But so I found out later. So my experience with this game, Reagan's and Rocket Ships, ended up being one of the subjects in a documentary film called Game Master. And when I saw the film after it was completed, there was an interview with the publisher. And he said that Reagan's and Rocket Ships was the most beautiful prototype he had ever seen. And he wanted it because of that reason. And so I argue back that it was worth that effort. Like the time and effort I put into making it as pretty and thematic as possible sold the game. Now, I have other game designer friends who are like, you're wasting too much time, you're spending too much money. To be honest, I have other than gaming and action figures and comic books, I have very few vices in my life. So a lot of my money goes back into prototypes. So I have some of them I probably spent way more money than I should have, but particularly if you get to a point where you realize that something is wrong or something needs to be redone, and then you have to, it's wasteful. I admit it, but it just happens. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't like it, but I'm willing to accept that as a cost. So their argument is, you're using all this time and effort and money when you could just be doing it simply. But I counter back, I am communicating a lot with this effort, and the more I can make people understand and fall in love with what I've created, the better.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. You list your vices there. I didn't hear Disneyland. It's not.
Oh yeah. Well, Disneyland is a part of my DNA. I have to be at Disneyland. I don't think I could really live without having it. That's part of the reason why I still live in Southern California.
I don't blame you. I wish I was back already, and I've already been there twice this year, and I'm Canadian, so.
I just updated my Magic Key, and I'm ready to go.
Nice. Okay. Well, the show, one of the key things I do on the show is I look for things from one format or media that is applicable to another one. Like in this instance, prototyping for physical space games, board games, tabletop games. What experiences can you take from that could be applicable to video game design and vice versa? Because you have worked in video games, what did you learn in video game work that you now use in prototyping tabletop?
Right. Even though my first love as a game designer was tabletop games, I learned how to prototype on paper in video games. And this can be as simple as maps, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons style maps. And if you look up video game design maps online, there are thousands of examples, including some of my own. But I also learned that maps wasn't the only way you could prototype things. And so I had a couple of really good mentors that were people that love physical medium. So one of them was a fellow named Bill Anderson, and he used to sculpt video game levels out of clay because he just liked to sculpt. Again, he kind of did it for the love of it. Could he have made the levels without doing that? Yeah, absolutely. But when you saw his sculpted levels and he, would present them in meetings and stuff, they never failed to impress. And he was able to, a big part of so prototypes, their ultimate goal are to become something to pitch, and pitching is salesmanship. And so anything that you can do to increase your odds of making a sale, particularly in tabletop game design, because you do a lot of pitching in tabletop game design. A lot of video game, at least in my experience, a lot of video games. So my bulk of my career was in the early 90s through the mid 2000s or mid 2010s. And so for a lot of video games, I didn't really have to pitch too often because they would often just say, well, we need a game about this, or we need, whatever. There was kind of a bit of it was easy to get things made back then it was hard to make original stuff. Like if you were like, hey, I've got this brand new idea for something, that was harder. But if it was like a license, if there was like, we have a license, SpongeBob SquarePants or the latest Pixar film or whatever, they needed a game. And so you could still be creative within that space, but it had a slot to fill. So I was very fortunate to have a lot of time in my career where I was filling slots, but I enjoyed it. I was able to be creative and do some really fun things. And when it came to board games, the sky was the limit. When I was like, I want to do this full time, I now could make up a game about anything. And that's one of the things I love about tabletop games is you literally can make a game about anything. And so now, will people buy it? That's another question. But you can make it about anything you can think of, but you have to sell it. And so that's the part of the reason why you want to put together that beautiful and fun to play prototype. Interesting too. It's got to have, there are a lot of factors that, like, it has to look good on the table. It has to be engaging. We're seeing certain trends right now in tabletop games, and I think a lot of them are very hard reactions to where tabletop gaming was about 15 years ago.
Interesting. My brain wants to wander down that and ask you what you mean, but I'm not sure.
Well, what I mean is there were certain types of games that were more popular. There were certain genres that were more popular. And I think that the egalitarianism of things like Kickstarter and the notion that anything can be a game has, trying to find a way to put this. Let's say this. I am fond of the traditional, well, let me readjust this, because the traditional things that you find in games were abstracts, chess and Go and backgammon and all that. And those I call classic games or games of antiquity. Sorry. But the modern mass market stuff, and I'm talking stuff from about the 60s to the 90s or so. That's what I grew up on. Those were mostly games either about war or finance or fantasy or sci-fi. And then you kind of get subgenres like superheroes and spies and things like that. And so those are the kind of games I don't really like war games, but I do like fantasy and sci-fi and comic book and stuff like that. Now, I think during that time, people kind of grew up with us and were like, well, is this it? And you often found that certain types of groups were marginalized because they just didn't have interest in those genres. But when Kickstarter started to roll around and everybody started to realize, hey, anybody can make a game and it can be about anything, you start getting a wider variety. And the good news is it brings in more people and it opens the doors up for more people to invite them in to design games. And, hopefully you're not encountering any gatekeepers because that's not cool. Everybody should be able to play. That's the beauty of tabletop game design is you need other players to play. And if you're a jerk or you're unwelcoming, you're not going to have those players and then you're not going to get to play games. So it is in your best interest to not be a jerk.
That's a good rule for life.
It is.
Speaking of making games about anything, as a graphic designer from way back, I wish somebody would make a game about Pantone colors.
Well, the irony is I made a game not about Pantone colors. I made a game about making characters out of pixels. And my publisher decided that Pantone would be a good fit for it. Now, I am happy to say that the game that is currently known as Pantone will be getting a second life soon. And what form that takes, I'll kind of leave that for another time. But the game will persist. The system will persist, and I think it's a good one. I am very proud of the game. I think again, if I may pat myself on the back, I think it's kind of clever. I'm surprised nobody had ever thought of it before. That's really what surprised me about it. And my wife tells me that it's the best game I've ever made, so I have to believe her.
Well, there you go. It is good. It's very, very good. So she's right.
She's always right.
Yes. See, you're a smart guy. You know.
I'm just married. I've been married a long time.
Okay, well, I want to go a little philosophical with you for a second here. Prototyping is about testing a game, but I'm curious, has the work in prototyping ever influenced your life? Does it ever go back the other direction? Has the habit of creating rapid iterations and testing things ever impacted your life as a creative outside of game design?
Well, I'm looking at a large stack of boxes in my room right now. So it's impacted my life in the fact that I have too many prototypes. And matter of fact, the problem with prototypes is that you might make something and it might be great and just not have found a market. It might be okay and it would become great if you put some more effort into it. It might be a game that you just kind of missed the window of when it would have been a good game and now it's slightly out of date, or the theme just isn't quite right anymore, or whatever. And as a result, you end up with lots of orphaned prototypes. And so I have several of those. I still think many of them are good. I still would love to see some of them see the light of day as far as a commercial project. But in the meantime, they're just filling up my space. They're on the floor, or they're under my table, they're in my storage shed. If you go to my Board Game Geek listing as a game designer, you'll see that there are several games on there. And you'll also notice that several of them are unpublished. So, maybe one day they will be. You should never throw out a prototype, because I did that once and I have regretted it ever since.
Mm. There's a lesson for life right there.
Yeah. Don't throw out what you put effort into.
Amen. All right. Well, let's start bringing this core topic to a close. I guess one of the things I like to do is try and find something of value for the narrative folks, because that's pretty much my core audience these days. Sure. So I'm curious, for more narrative focused creators, and again, tabletop, role-playing, digital, but for any of these people, what's something that you wish they understood better about prototyping? Something that could change the way they approach their designs?
Right. For tabletop as well as video games, and I tell my students this all the time, ultimately, a game is something that is meant to be interacted with. It's not a story. It's not a movie. It's not a play. The lore is fine, but keep it in your back pocket early on. You can use it to kind of sprinkle over your prototype to give it a little flavor, but nobody gives a crap about your huge, backstory and lore that goes back, hundreds of years, or the massive world that you've created. Ray guns and rocket ships, I have I want to say it's like a 25 or 30 page Bible of lore that goes with it. Only, I would say it's fair to say maybe 3% of it is represented in the game. And that's the 3% that matters. And all of that other stuff, I will sit on, and maybe I'll have another opportunity to use it for something else if I ever, go back and remake the game, or remake it into expansions, or reuse the license in a different way. I've thought about, hey, maybe this could be a good role-playing game or something like that, right? And then it would come in more useful. But for now, you got to restrain yourself. And a lot of, I'll say kids, and I say that only because I'm older than most. A lot of kids are enamored with narrative. I say, what do you want to do for a living? And they say, I want to be a narrative designer. And I'm like, great, be something else first. If you're in making video games, be a designer or a programmer or an artist. Because that is the best way you're going to be able to get to tell your stories, because you're going to be working on something that's important to the game. And then all of a sudden people are going to go, wait a second, we need story here, or we need someone to write dialogue, or we need backstory. And that's how I got my start as doing these for video games. I was an artist, and then later a level and systems designer. And when the moment came where they're like, well, we need a script for this, I'd raise my hand. I say, I know how to write scripts. I have a degree in screenwriting. I'll do it. And so that's how I got my writing into video games. And then eventually people were like, oh, you wrote this? Oh, okay, well, then maybe you could do this make something original. And so I've had a chance to write some original stuff as well, which is very satisfying. So same with board games. Make your game first. Concentrate on the gameplay because games are meant to be played. There are games that have a lot of reading in it, but to be honest, that's, the people often do the equivalent of hitting the X button, right? They're like, let me just skim and get through it, hit the high points. If it pertains to gameplay, great. If it doesn't, it's not necessary. And it's frustrating, I know, because I'm one of those people that I like story and I like writing story. But I also realize that I have to have restraint when doing that because it's often not servicing the game and the gameplay.
Excellent advice. Well, that brings us to the end of the core topic. I do have some fun stuff I like to do on the way out to the door here. You've answered my philosophical question before about the intersection of story and games. So I had to come up with something new for you, but I did.
Yeah. Keep you on your toes.
That's right. It made me have to think for once. When you spend your life building worlds and systems and gameplay mechanics, what does being inside of that space and building these things, what does it teach you about how to move through the real world? How does creating games and making stories help you live and, coexist and be a meaningful member of society as a human being?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, let me talk first about how it affects me, and then I'll talk about I'll talk about it insular first, and then I'll talk about it going out next. Writing stories and creating narrative. As a storyteller, I often find I have to have a structure to hang my story on. I'm not somebody to which stories come easily. Now, I can tell a story if it's like relating an event or connecting ideas together for educational purposes. Mm-hmm. But I've never, other than stuff for my games, I've never like sat down and said, I'm going to write a novel or that like a big work of fiction. I used to write screenplays when I was in college, and I got away from that when I got into video games. And then I ended up doing some of that in video games. But it's not ever come easy for me per se. So, but when I do write, they always say, well, you have to live inside the shoes of another person. And that is a skill that I'm still working on as a creative person and as a human being. But what it does is you eventually gain empathy. And that's a very, like I said, don't be a jerk, right? That's a very important trait for all people to have. And we're seeing, particularly nowadays, not to stand on my soapbox, but I will stand on a very small soapbox, which is we're kind of seeing what happens if you aren't that type of person. And we're seeing a lot of bad come out of it. And so the more bad that I see being done by other people, the more it makes me want to do good. And try to be helpful. Now, I'm not going out there and laying down in front of a tank or something like that, but I'm trying to find little meaningful ways to try to be a better person. But then again, I've also grown up with I like superheroes, and I was a Boy Scout, and all those things that are stereotypes about the people that like those types of things are very true in me. I don't see the world as black and white, but I do prefer my world to be black and white. It just makes things a lot easier to wrestle with. All right, so let's talk about going back out into the world, and that is that notion of not only being able to take what I've learned, taking what I've learned and then sharing it. So I guess it's an extension of that mentality of trying to do good. And this is why I teach, and this is why I've written books. And it's part of the reason why I write games. Now, I can't say I have infused too many of my games with morals in them. A lot of them are intellectual properties anyway, so you're kind of stuck with retelling a story. But I do like to make content where the players are doing good rather than doing bad. I've created games for anti-heroes. I just don't care for it as much. I've often turned down jobs because of the subject matter. I don't believe in the glorification of crime, for example. So I don't, I would never make a Grand Theft Auto or something like that. And so, and everybody, it's good to know where your lines are. It's good to have those things where you just go, no, I won't do it. It's just not for me. And it's okay. You can have a perfectly successful career without selling your soul.
I love that. That is fantastic. Good stuff. Good answer. Okay, well, we're going to start heading for the door. I like to open up a little space for signal boosting. Is there anything that you've worked on or are working on that you want to share with the world? Your 3 books. Where else? And where?
Yeah, the 3 books are Level Up, The Guide to Great Video Game Design, Swipe This, The Guide to Great Touchscreen Game Design, and Your Turn, The Guide to Great Tabletop Game Design. And there's a bit of a theme there. You can find them all on Amazon and other places where books are sold. And if you do read them, and I'm very proud of them, and they've gotten a lot of positive review. If you read them and you enjoy them and you find them useful, please post the reviews, because nothing helps an author more than a good review. And that's the same with board games and video games. And because, my goal as a creator is to keep making these things because I like making them, but I also see that people enjoy them. And I derive a lot of pleasure from seeing people enjoy the things I've made. And so reviews help steer people towards my works. For tabletop games, you mentioned Pantone, the game that's still available at the Cryptozoic Entertainment website. The Alien Fate of the Nostromo, which is a game I designed for Ravensburger, is still available on Amazon and at board game stores internationally as well. I'm proud that one is in many different languages. My latest game you can read about on my blog, which is called Mr. Boss's Design Lair. And I'm walking, my backers are due an update. I'm terribly behind, but I have a couple of good ones that I want to share with them. So I got to write those hopefully this weekend. And I've outlined the entire process of all 3 of these games that I was talking about earlier, these little short run production games. And the latest one, which is I Do My Own Stunts, which is a meeple rolling, set collecting, matching action game. I still have a few copies left of that. And so, like I said, there's only 100 that are being made. I think I've sold like 78 of them or something like that. So there's still a few that are left to be sold. I think they're like $65 plus shipping. So if you're interested, go check it out at Mr. Boss Design Lair, and then send me an email and say, hey, I'm in. Let me get one of these crazy meeple rolling games. And it's really a lot of fun. I like it a lot. I like playing it. That's a real challenge for me, is to design a game that I enjoy playing. And as much as I love Pantone, I can't play it because I know all the answers. But Alien, I still love playing, and I Do My Own Stunts, I love playing. And Oh No, There Goes Tokyo, I still love playing. So, and keep your eye out. Something is happening with Oh No, There Goes Tokyo, as well as the game that used to be Pantone. The working title was Who's Hugh, and I suspect that title might be coming back.
Excellent. All right. Well, I will make sure to include all of the links in the show notes for people who are wanting to check all that out. And anybody who's looking at grabbing the books, try the chili.
Yeah. Make the chili recipes. All 3 different editions have different chili recipes in them.
I haven't tried the 3rd one yet. So
okay.
Just to do this holiday season. So.
All right. There you go. You'll have to do a taste test. Have a chili cook-off.
I will. That's a wonderful idea. All right, well, it is time for us to head for the door, and I'm going to push you out into the Canadian cold because it was snowing tonight. So, but on the way out the door,
I have my sweater on. It's okay.
You're Californian, you'll still freeze. On the way out the door, I'd love to give you the last word of the show. So, on your way out, do you have any parting words of wisdom? This could be craft, it could be life. Hit me with it.
If you want to make games, then make games.
And that wraps up another episode of The Corner of Story and Game. Scott, thank you for taking us into the world of prototyping and for reminding us to test early, fail fast, and stay curious. And to you, dear listener, thank you for taking your seat at the table. If you found something of value in this episode, please share with a friend, colleague, fellow designer, writer, or dreamer, because every project starts with a question and the willingness to try something, even if it's rough. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.